The photo wasn't meant for him. Sada's thumb hovered over the delete button as horror washed through her like ice water. But the message status had already changed to read. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she stared at the screen, at the image she'd accidentally sent to the wrong contact, a contact whose name sat at the very top of her recent messages, like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Kang Min-ho Seoul's most dangerous man, and she'd just sent him a photo meant for her best friend. A photo of her in nothing but black lace, curves on full display, taken in a moment of confidence she now desperately wanted to erase. Her phone buzzed. One word appeared. Address. Welcome to K-Fairy Tale Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Sada's entire body went cold. She stared at that single word like it might suddenly rearrange itself into something less terrifying. But the letters remained stubbornly in place, demanding an answer she couldn't give. Her fingers shook as she typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the only thing that made sense. Wrong number, I'm so sorry. Please delete that. The response came within seconds. I asked for your address. She threw the phone onto her bed like it had burned her, pressing both hands against her face as panic clawed its way up her throat. This couldn't be happening. She'd only met Kang Min-ho once, 3 weeks ago at her cousin's wedding reception, and that encounter had lasted exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes of him staring at her with eyes so dark and intense she'd felt stripped bare under his gaze. 4 minutes of him barely speaking, while she rambled nervously about the food and the decorations, and anything else that might fill the suffocating silence he carried with him like a second skin. Her cousin had pulled her aside afterward with a warning wrapped in sisterly concern. Stay away from him. Min-ho owns half the businesses in Gangnam and all the secrets. He's not someone you want noticing you, but he had noticed. And now Sada had given him a reason to do more than notice. Her phone buzzed again, then again. She forced herself to look. You have 30 seconds to give me your address before I find it myself. Don't make me wait, Sada. The use of her name made something hot and terrifying twist in her stomach. She grabbed the phone with trembling hands and typed out her address before her brain could catch up to her fingers. The moment she hit send, she wanted to take it back, to throw the phone out the window, to somehow undo the last 10 minutes of her life. His response was immediate. Good girl. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Sada looked around her small apartment in panic, at the laundry she hadn't folded, the dishes in the sink, the art supplies scattered across her table because she'd been working on a commission when her best friend had texted asking for outfit advice for a date. 20 minutes before Seoul's most dangerous man showed up at her door, because she'd accidentally sent him a photo that was never meant for his eyes. She should run. She should pack a bag and disappear into the night and maybe move to a different city, a different country, somewhere Kang Min-ho's influence couldn't reach. But her legs wouldn't move. Her body seemed to understand something her mind refused to accept. That running from a man like him was pointless, that he would find her no matter where she went, that the only choice she really had was whether to face him with dignity or with fear. Sada chose dignity. She changed out of her painting clothes into jeans and a sweater that covered everything the photo had revealed, scrubbed the paint from her hands, and tried to calm her racing heart. She failed at the last part. Exactly 20 minutes later, her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Kang Min-ho filling her doorway like a storm contained in human form. He wore all black, a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with his jacket unbuttoned and his tie slightly loosened like he'd been somewhere important before deciding her apartment was more worth his time. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, with a face that could have been carved from stone if not for the intensity burning in his dark eyes. Those eyes swept over her once, taking in every detail from her bare feet to her damp hair, and something in his expression shifted. Softened almost imperceptibly before hardening again into something possessive and utterly unreadable. You're going to invite me in, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sada's throat felt dry. I don't think that's a good idea.
I don't care what you think is a good idea. He stepped forward, and she stepped back automatically, giving him exactly the opening he wanted. He moved into her apartment with the confidence of someone who owned every space he entered, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded far too final. I care that you sent me a photo that's been burned into my brain for the last 20 minutes. I care that every man in Seoul with eyes would kill to see what I just saw. And I care that you're standing here trying to pretend you didn't just change everything between us. There is no us, Sada said, forcing strength into her voice that she didn't feel. It was an accident. I was sending it to my friend and I clicked the wrong contact. I'm sorry you had to see that, but it doesn't mean anything. Minho's laugh was dark and entirely humorless. It means everything. He moved closer until she could smell his cologne, expensive and woodsy with an edge of something dangerous underneath. Do you know what I was doing when I got your message? I was in a meeting with 12 men who control half of Seoul's underground economy. I was negotiating a deal worth 3 billion won. And then my phone lit up with your face and your body, and suddenly nothing else in that room mattered except getting to you. Her heart hammered against her ribs. You shouldn't have come here. Probably not. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to move away, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor as his fingers brushed her cheek with unexpected gentleness. But I've been thinking about you since your cousin's wedding, wondering why a woman I met for 4 minutes has been living in my head rent-free for 3 weeks. Wondering what it would take to see you again without looking like I was stalking my business partner's family. And then you handed me a reason on a silver platter. Sada's breath caught. You've been thinking about me? Constantly. The admission seemed to cost him something, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. Do you know how many women have tried to get my attention in the last 5 years? Hundreds, thousands maybe. And I looked through every single one of them like they were made of glass. Then you show up at a wedding in a yellow dress that should have been illegal, stumbling over your words while explaining to me why the centerpieces were made with peonies instead of roses, and something in my chest just stopped. She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Stopped? Woke up, he corrected, his thumb still tracing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. I thought I was dead inside, thought I'd killed every soft part of myself to survive in my world. And then you smiled at me like I was just a man instead of a monster, and I felt something I didn't think I was capable of feeling anymore. What did you feel? The question came out as barely a whisper. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Want, need, the absolute certainty that I would burn down Seoul to keep you safe, all from 4 minutes of listening to you talk about flowers. Sada should have been terrified. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was wrong, that men like Kang Min-ho didn't show up at apartments and confess feelings, that this was dangerous in ways she couldn't even imagine. But there was something in the way he looked at her, like she was precious and breakable and worth protecting, that made her want to step closer instead of backing away. I don't understand what you want from me, she said finally. Everything. The word was simple but carried the weight of a vow. But we'll start with dinner. Tomorrow night, let me take you somewhere nice and show you that I'm more than what people say about me. And what do people say about you? His smile was sharp. That I'm ruthless, that I have no conscience, that I've destroyed men for looking at me wrong and buried secrets so deep they'll never see daylight. All of it's true, by the way. But with you, he paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. With you, I want to be different, want to be the kind of man who deserves to see you smile. Sada's heart did something complicated in her chest. One dinner, he agreed. But the satisfaction in his eyes suggested he knew one dinner would lead to more. His hand dropped from her face and he pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed her the screen. I deleted the photo. I won't lie and say I didn't look at it 50 times first, but it's gone now. Your body is nobody's business but yours, and I won't disrespect you by keeping something that wasn't meant for me. The gesture was so unexpectedly thoughtful that Sada felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. But Sada, if you ever want to send me another photo, make sure it's intentional, because I promise you, I'll appreciate it more than any man you've ever known. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in her apartment with her racing heart and the lingering scent of his cologne and the absolute certainty that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand. The next morning brought flowers. 24 blood-red roses delivered to her door with a card that simply read, "Wear something beautiful. I'll pick you up at 7 M." Sada stared at the roses like they might explode, then spent the entire day oscillating between excitement and terror. By 6:30, she'd changed outfits 4 times before settling on a black dress that hugged her curves and made her feel confident without being obvious. She left her natural curls loose, applied makeup with a careful hand, and tried to ignore the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her cousin, warning her away from dangerous men. Minho arrived at exactly 7, looking devastating in a charcoal suit with his hair pushed back from his face. His eyes went dark when he saw her, and for a moment he just stood there drinking her in like she was something rare and precious. "You're beautiful," he said finally, his voice rough around the edges. "You're not so bad yourself." She grabbed her clutch, trying to ignore how her hands shook slightly. The restaurant he took her to was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, where every table had a view and the waitstaff moved like synchronized dancers. Sada felt out of her depth immediately, but Minho's hand found the small of her back as they were led to a private room, steadying her, grounding her, making her feel like she belonged anywhere he was. "Tell me about your art," he said, once they were seated, and the genuine interest in his voice caught her off guard. "How did you know I'm an artist?" "I looked you up." He said it without shame, like stalking was perfectly acceptable behavior. Sada Okonkwo, 26 years old, moved to Seoul 3 years ago to study traditional Korean painting, graduated top of your class. Now you work freelance, mostly doing commission pieces for private collectors. You live alone, you don't date much, and you send your mother money every month even though you can barely afford rent. Sada's mouth went dry. "That's thorough. I'm a thorough man." His eyes held hers across the table. "I needed to know everything about the woman who's been haunting my thoughts for 3 weeks. Needed to understand why I couldn't stop thinking about yellow dresses and nervous rambling about flowers. Most people would call that creepy. Most people aren't being honest about what they want." He leaned forward slightly. "I want you, Sada. I've wanted you since the moment you smiled at me like I was human, and I'm not the kind of man who pretends otherwise or plays games. So yes, I researched you. Yes, I showed up at your apartment. Yes, I'm probably moving too fast and being too intense, but I'd rather be honest about my obsession than lie and pretend I'm not completely fascinated by everything about you." Her breath caught at the raw honesty in his words. "You don't even know me. Then let me learn." His hand reached across the table, palm up, an invitation. "Let me take you to dinner and ask you questions and memorize all the little things that make you who you are. Let me prove I'm more than what Soul says about me." Sada looked at his outstretched hand, at the scars on his knuckles that spoke of violence, at the steady patience in his dark eyes. Every rational part of her screamed to run, but her heart, traitorous and foolish, wanted to see where this dangerous path might lead. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him, and when he smiled, really smiled, it transformed his entire face into something devastatingly beautiful. "Now," he said, rubbing his thumb across her knuckles in a gesture that sent heat flooding through her. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him about growing up in Lagos with big dreams and bigger fears, about moving to Seoul with nothing but a suitcase and determination, about falling in love with Korean art and culture, about the loneliness of being an outsider in a country that didn't always know what to do with her. She told him about her mother's worry and her cousin's warnings and her own fears that she'd made a terrible mistake, leaving everything familiar behind. Minho listened with an intensity that made her feel like nothing else in the world existed except her voice. He asked questions that showed he was actually paying attention, that drew out details she'd never shared with anyone. And when she finally ran out of words, he squeezed her hand and shared pieces of his own story in return. He told her about inheriting his father's organization at 23 after a car accident that was probably an assassination attempt, about spending the last 7 years building power and crushing enemies and learning that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, about the loneliness of being feared by everyone who looked at him, of never knowing if people wanted him or just what he could do for them. "Until you," he said quietly, "you looked at me and saw a man. Just a man. Not a reputation or a bank account or a weapon, and I can't tell you how much that meant." Sada's heart clenched. "I didn't know who you were at the wedding." "Exactly." His smile was sad and beautiful. "You were the first person in years to meet me without knowing my name first. The first person to smile at me because you wanted to, not because you were afraid not to." The vulnerability in his confession made her want to reach across the table and smooth the tension from his face. "What changed? Why tell me all this now?" Because I don't want to start whatever this is with lies between us. He held her gaze. You deserve to know exactly who you're having dinner with, what I've done, what I'm capable of, the darkness that comes with being close to me. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to be honest. His grip tightened on her hand. If you walk away after tonight, I'll understand. I'll hate it, but I'll understand. But if you stay, if you choose this, choose me, then you need to know what you're choosing. Sada looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb traced patterns on her skin like he was memorizing her by touch. She thought about the warnings, about the danger, about all the sensible reasons to thank him for dinner and never see him again. Then she thought about the way he'd deleted that photo to protect her dignity, the way he'd asked about her art with genuine interest, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. I'm not scared, she heard herself say. Something blazed in his eyes. You should be. Maybe. She squeezed his hand back. But I'm choosing to stay anyway. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation and slowly building tension. Every time their eyes met, heat sparked between them like static electricity. Every accidental touch felt deliberate. By the time dessert arrived, Sada's skin felt too tight and her heart raced like she'd been running. Min-ho seemed to feel it too. His jaw was tight, his movements carefully controlled, like he was restraining himself from reaching across the table and pulling her into his lap. I should take you home, he said finally, his voice rough. You should, she agreed, but neither of them moved. They stared at each other across the table, the air thick with everything unsaid, everything they both wanted but were too careful to voice. Then Min-ho stood and offered his hand, and Sada took it, letting him pull her to her feet and lead her from the restaurant with his palm warm against her lower back. The drive to her apartment was silent but charged. His hand rested on her thigh, a possessive weight that made her breath catch every time his thumb moved. She could feel his control fraying, could see the tension in his shoulders, could sense that he was holding himself back from something that would change everything between them. When they reached her building, he walked her to her door like a perfect gentleman. But when she unlocked it and turned to say goodnight, the look in his eyes made words die in her throat. Can I come in? He asked, and the raw need in his voice made her knees weak. Every sensible part of her screamed no. It was too soon, too fast, too dangerous, but her body was already moving, already pulling him inside, already betraying every rational thought with the simple truth that she wanted him just as desperately as he seemed to want her. The door closed behind them, and they stood in her small entryway, breathing hard, staring at each other like two people on the edge of a cliff deciding whether to jump. Tell me to leave, Min-ho said roughly. Tell me this is too fast and I'll walk away. I'll wait as long as you need. Just tell me what you want. Sada looked at this dangerous man who'd somehow become tender in her presence, who looked at her like she was precious, who made her feel seen for the first time in years. Stay, she whispered. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands cupping her face as his mouth found hers with a desperation that stole her breath. She kissed him back with equal hunger, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his like she could somehow get closer than skin to skin. Everything that happened after that was heat and want and the desperate need to know each other completely. They stumbled toward her bedroom between kisses, clothes falling away, barriers crumbling, until there was nothing between them except skin and want and the overwhelming certainty that this moment would change everything. And it did. Sada woke alone. The space beside her was cold, the sheets barely wrinkled, like Min-ho had never been there at all. Panic seized her chest as she sat up, clutching the blanket to her body, searching for any sign that last night had been real and not some fever dream born from loneliness and want. Then she saw the note on her nightstand, written in sharp, precise handwriting on expensive cardstock. Had to handle something urgent. Didn't want to wake you. You looked peaceful. I'll call you later. M. Beneath the words was a phone number and something that made her breath catch. A black card with his name embossed in silver, the kind of card that opened doors and commanded respect and marked her as someone under his protection. Sada pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the taste of him, the way his hands had learned every curve of her body with devastating thoroughness, the sounds he'd made when she'd touched him back. Heat flooded her face as memories crashed through her in waves. She'd slept with Kang Min-ho after one dinner. She'd given herself to Seoul's most dangerous man with barely any hesitation at all, and worst of all, she didn't regret it. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "It's Min Ho. I hope you slept well. I'll send my driver to pick you up at noon. We need to talk." The formal tone made her stomach twist. This was it. The morning after regret, the gentle letdown, the inevitable conversation where he explained that last night was a mistake and they should both pretend it never happened. She'd heard this story before, lived it twice with men who'd seemed interested until they got what they wanted. But Min Ho wasn't like other men. And when his driver arrived at exactly noon in a black Mercedes that probably cost more than her apartment building, Sada found herself getting in despite every instinct screaming at her to protect her heart. The drive took them to a building in Gangnam that rose above the city like a monument to power itself. Min Ho's headquarters, she realized as they entered through a private garage and took an elevator that required a fingerprint scan. Everything about this place screamed danger and wealth and the kind of authority that didn't ask permission for anything. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Seoul. And there, standing at those windows with his back to her, was Min Ho. He wore different clothes than last night, a navy suit perfectly tailored, but his shoulders carried the same tension she remembered from their first meeting. "You came," he said without turning around. "You sent a car." Sada stayed near the elevator, suddenly uncertain. "You said we needed to talk." "We do." He finally turned to face her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. Not regret, not disappointment. Something fiercer, more possessive, edged with barely controlled fury. "I need to explain some things before this goes any further, before I take this from something physical to something permanent." "Permanent?" The word came out strangled. Min Ho crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands framing her face with the same gentleness from last night. "I told you I don't play games. I told you I'm obsessed with you. Last night wasn't scratching an itch or satisfying curiosity. It was me claiming you in every way that matters. And now I need you to understand what that means." Sada's heart hammered. "What does it mean?" "It means you're mine now." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "It means I'm going to protect you and provide for you and eliminate any threat that comes near you. It means I'm going to be possessive and jealous and probably overbearing because the thought of anyone else touching you makes me violent. And it means I'm going to spend every day proving that choosing me wasn't a mistake." She stared at him, unable to process the intensity in his voice. "Min Ho, I have enemies," he continued, his jaw tight. "People who would hurt you just to hurt me. People who see any weakness as something to exploit. The moment you walked into my office last night, the moment you chose to stay, you became my greatest weakness. And I need you to decide right now if you can live with that. If you can live with guards and restrictions and the knowledge that being with me puts a target on your back." The brutal honesty in his words should have terrified her. Instead, it made something warm bloom in her chest. The knowledge that he cared enough to warn her, that he valued her safety over his own desires. "What if I can't?" she asked quietly. "What if it's too much?" Pain flickered across his face. "Then I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're protected from a distance. I'll watch over you like a ghost and make sure nothing touches you, even if it kills me to stay away." "But Sada," his voice dropped to something raw and desperate, "please don't ask me to let you go. Not when I just found you. Not when you're the first good thing in my life in 7 years. Tears burned her eyes. "You barely know me. I know enough." His forehead touched hers. "I know you're kind even when the world hasn't been kind to you. I know you're brave enough to move to a foreign country alone. I know you paint beauty into existence because you refuse to let ugliness win. I know you make me want to be better than I am, and I know that losing you would destroy me in ways my enemies never could." The confession broke something open inside her. This is insane. Completely. His lips brushed hers softly. "Say yes anyway." Sada thought about running, about choosing safety over this dangerous, beautiful thing building between them. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the desperate hope there, the vulnerability beneath all that controlled power, she knew running was impossible. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "I'm saying yes." The kiss that followed was nothing like last night's desperation. This was a vow, a promise, a claiming that went bone deep. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Minho rested his forehead against hers and smiled like she'd just given him the world. "Thank God," he murmured. "Because I already assigned you a security team and had your apartment upgraded with better locks. Would have been awkward to cancel all that." She laughed despite herself. "You're impossible. I'm yours." He kissed her again. "And you're mine. Everything else we'll figure out together." The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjusting to her new reality. Minho kept his word about being possessive. He showed up at her apartment every night with dinner from expensive restaurants, sat with her while she painted, asked questions about her work with genuine interest. He sent flowers to her studio at least 3 times a week, each bouquet accompanied by notes that ranged from sweet to devastatingly romantic. But he also kept his word about protection. 2 guards now watched her building. Her phone had been upgraded to one with encrypted messaging, and any time she went out, one of Minho's men followed at a discreet distance. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like being valued, like someone finally cared enough to keep her safe. The first time someone tested that safety came 3 weeks into their relationship. Sada was leaving an art supply store when a man approached, seemingly friendly, asking directions in broken Korean. She started to respond when her guard, a man named Tae-sung, suddenly materialized between them. "Step back," Tae-sung said in a tone that allowed no argument. The friendly mask dropped from the stranger's face. "Just wanted to talk to her, see what makes her so special that Minho lost his mind." Everything happened fast after that. Tae-sung's hand went to his concealed weapon. The stranger pulled a knife. Sada stumbled backward, her heart in her throat, as 2 more guards appeared from nowhere and subdued the attacker with brutal efficiency. Minho arrived 10 minutes later, his face carved from stone, fury radiating from every line of his body. He swept past the guards straight to Sada, his hands running over her like he was checking for injuries, even though she hadn't been touched. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes. "I'm fine." Tae-sung stopped him before. "Good." He pulled her against his chest, one arm banding around her waist while his other hand tangled in her hair. She felt him shaking, felt the barely controlled rage vibrating through his frame. "I'm going to kill him. Slowly, painfully. I'm going to make sure every person in Seoul knows what happens when someone threatens what's mine." "Minho, don't." His grip tightened. "Don't ask me to show mercy. Don't ask me to be reasonable. He pulled a knife on you. He could have hurt you. And I will burn this entire city down before I let that happen again." The terrifying thing was, she believed him. The even more terrifying thing was that some dark part of her was thrilled by his possessive fury, by the knowledge that he would commit violence to keep her safe. Later that night, after Minho had dealt with the threat in whatever brutal way he deemed necessary, he held her in his penthouse bedroom and made love to her with a desperation that stole her breath. His hands were everywhere, claiming, memorizing, making sure she was real and whole and his. "Never again," he murmured against her skin between kisses. "I won't lose you. I can't." Sada held him just as tightly, understanding that beneath all his power and control, Minho was terrified of losing the one good thing he'd found in his dark world. That fear made him dangerous. It also made him heartbreakingly human. The following month brought new challenges. Sada's cousin called, her voice tight with worry. "You need to end things with Minho. People are talking, saying you're his weakness, saying you're going to get hurt. I can take care of myself. Can you?" Her cousin's voice softened. "Sada, I love you, but you're out of your depth. Minho's world isn't art galleries and dinner dates. It's violence and betrayal and danger you can't even imagine. Please, for your own safety, walk away before it's too late." But it was already too late. Sada had fallen completely for the dangerous man who looked at her like she was precious, who sent her flowers and showed up at her studio just to watch her paint, who held her at night like she might disappear if he let go. She was in love with Kang Min-ho, and that terrified her more than any threat ever could. The crisis came on a Tuesday. Sada was working late at her studio when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Sada Okonkwo." The voice was cold, feminine, precise. "You don't know me, but I know everything about you. Your address, your family in Lagos, your mother's phone number. Your complete lack of protection when Minho isn't watching." Ice flooded Sada's veins. "Who is this?" Someone who wants what Minho has, and the easiest way to take it from him is through you. The woman laughed, sharp and cruel. He should have known better than to show weakness. Men in his position can't afford to love. It makes them vulnerable. It makes them stupid. And now you're going to pay for his stupidity. The line went dead. Sada's hands shook as she immediately called Minho. He answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" She told him everything, her words tumbling over each other. By the time she finished, she could hear him moving, barking orders to people she couldn't see. "Stay exactly where you are," he commanded. "I'm sending a team. Don't open the door for anyone except Tae-sung. Do you understand?" "Minho, who was that woman?" His pause was heavy. "Someone from my past. Someone I thought was dealt with. I'll explain everything later. Right now, I need you to stay calm and stay safe. Promise me." "I promise." "Good girl." His voice softened fractionally. "I'm coming for you. Just hold on." The team arrived within minutes. 6 men in tactical gear who swept her studio like it was a war zone before escorting her to an armored car. They drove to a location she didn't recognize. A safe house in the mountains outside Seoul, all steel reinforcement and bulletproof glass. Minho was already there, pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw her, relief crashed over his face before fury took its place again. "Inside," he ordered, his hand finding her elbow as he practically dragged her through security checkpoints into a bedroom that looked more like a luxury bunker. The moment the door closed, he pulled her into his arms with enough force to steal her breath. "God," he muttered against her hair. "When you called, when I heard the fear in your voice, He broke off, his arms tightening until she could barely breathe. "I can't lose you. Do you understand? I cannot lose you." Sada held him back just as fiercely. "Who was she? The woman on the phone?" Minho pulled back slightly, his hands framing her face. "Her name is Park Ji-won. She used to work for me 5 years ago. I caught her embezzling money, dealt with her accordingly, or so I thought. Apparently she survived, and she's been building power in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And I'm that moment. You're everything." His thumb brushed her cheek. "She's right about one thing. Loving you makes me vulnerable, but I don't care. I'd rather be vulnerable with you than invincible alone." The confession made her heart clench. "Minho, marry me." The words dropped between them like stones in still water. Sada stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his eyes intense and absolutely certain. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together 2 months, but I also know that I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're it for me, Sada. You're the reason I wake up, the reason I want to be better than I am, and I refuse to waste another day pretending I don't want forever with you." Tears flooded her eyes. "This is insane. Everything about us is insane." He kissed her softly. "Say yes anyway." She thought about all the reasons to refuse, the danger, the speed, the impossibility of their worlds colliding. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the desperate hope there, the love barely contained beneath his controlled exterior, every reason evaporated like smoke. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was everything, joy and relief, and promises wrapped in the taste of him. When they finally broke apart, Minho rested his forehead against hers and smiled like she'd just given him salvation. "I'll keep you safe," he vowed. "From Ji-won, from anyone who tries to hurt you. I swear on everything I am." "I know," she said, believing him completely. But keeping her safe meant going to war. Over the next week, Minho mobilized his entire organization. Sada watched from the safe house as he transformed from the tender man who held her at night into something colder, more ruthless. The man's soul feared. He tracked Ji-won's movements, identified her allies, systematically dismantled her operation piece by piece. And when he finally found her hiding in an abandoned warehouse in Incheon, he went himself to end it. Sada had begged to go with him. Minho had refused. "This isn't your world," he'd said firmly. "This is the ugly part, the part I don't want you to see. I'm going to be your wife. I need to see all of you." Something shifted in his expression. "Are you sure?" She was. So she went with him to that warehouse, surrounded by his guards, and watched as he confronted the woman who'd threatened her life. Ji-won was beautiful in a cold way, all sharp edges and calculated cruelty. "So this is her," Ji-won said. her eyes raking over Sada with disdain, the weakness that brought Seoul's king to his knees. I expected someone more impressive. Don't speak to her. Minho's voice was ice. In fact, don't even look at her. You've already signed your death warrant by threatening her. The only question now is how much you're going to suffer before I end you. Jiwon laughed. You won't kill me. Not in front of your precious girlfriend. You want her to see you as a hero, not a monster. She already knows what I am. Minho moved forward with predatory grace. She knows I've killed men for less than what you've done. She knows I'm capable of violence you can't imagine. And she chose me anyway. That's the difference between you and her. She sees my darkness and loves me despite it. You only ever saw what I could give you. Then he looked at Sada, and the coldness in his eyes melted into something tender. Look away, baby. This part isn't for you. But Sada didn't look away. She watched as Minho's men subdued Jiwon with brutal efficiency, as justice was delivered in ways that didn't involve courts or lawyers. She watched and understood that this was who he was capable of terrible things, yes, but also capable of protecting what he loved with absolute devotion. When it was over, when Jiwon had been dealt with and the threat eliminated, Minho came to her with blood on his knuckles and fear in his eyes. Say something, he said roughly. Tell me I didn't just ruin everything between us. Sada looked at this dangerous, complicated man who'd turned her world upside down. Then she took his bloodied hand and pressed it against her cheek. Take me home, she said simply. Relief crashed over his face. He pulled her into his arms, not caring about the blood or the violence still clinging to him. I love you, he said fiercely. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, she whispered back. All of you, even the dark parts. That night, back at his penthouse, they made love with a desperation born from nearly losing each other. Minho worshipped every inch of her like she was something sacred, and Sada held him like he was precious instead of dangerous. And in the aftermath, tangled together in the darkness, they made promises about forever. The wedding happened 3 months later, small, intimate, just family and Minho's closest allies. Sada wore white, a dress that made Minho's breath catch when he saw her. He wore a traditional Korean suit, looking every inch the powerful man he was. But when they exchanged vows, when he slipped a ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, he was just a man promising to love a woman for the rest of his life. You're mine now, he murmured against her lips after they were pronounced married. Forever. I was always yours, she whispered back. From the moment I accidentally sent you that photo. His laugh was warm and full of joy. Best wrong number I ever received. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Jeju, away from Seoul and threats and the weight of Minho's empire. They spent days exploring the island and nights learning each other even more thoroughly. And it was there, in a villa overlooking the ocean, that Sada realized something had changed in her body. The pregnancy test confirmed it 2 weeks after they returned to Seoul. She stared at the positive result with shaking hands, joy and terror warring in her chest. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. And now she was carrying the child of Seoul's most dangerous man. Minho found her sitting on their bathroom floor, the test clutched in her hand. He took one look at her face and went very still. Tell me, he said quietly. She held up the test wordlessly. For a moment he just stared at it, processing. Then slowly, carefully, he sank down beside her and pulled her into his arms. How do you feel? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Terrified, she admitted, but also happy. Is that crazy? No. He pressed his face into her hair. It's perfect. You're perfect. This is perfect. She pulled back to look at him. You're not upset? Upset? Something fierce and possessive blazed in his eyes. Sada, you're carrying my child. You're giving me a family. The only thing I'm upset about is that I can't lock you away somewhere completely safe until they're born. Despite her fears, she laughed. That's your first instinct? Kidnapping? With you? Always. He kissed her softly. I love you. I love our baby. And I promise I will protect both of you with everything I have. 9 months later, after a labor that made Minho nearly lose his mind with worry, their daughter was born. She had Sada's dark skin and Minho's sharp eyes, and from the moment she entered the world screaming her displeasure, both her parents were completely lost to her. Minho held his daughter with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face, unashamed. "She's perfect," he whispered in awe. "She's absolutely perfect." Sada watched her dangerous husband transform into a gentle father, watched him coo over their daughter and promise her the world, and felt her heart expand with so much love she thought it might burst. "What should we name her?" she asked. Minho looked up, his eyes still wet with tears. "Grace, because that's what you both gave me. Grace I didn't deserve but received anyway. Grace Minho Park." Sada tested the name. "I love it." He moved to sit beside her on the hospital bed. Their daughter nestled between them and pressed a kiss to Sada's temple. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for sending that photo, for saying yes to dinner, for choosing me despite everything, for giving me a reason to be better than I was, for this." He touched their daughter's tiny hand with infinite tenderness. Sada leaned into him, exhausted and happy and more in love than she'd ever thought possible. "Best wrong number I ever sent. Best mistake that ever happened to me." They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, a family built from an accidental photo and one dangerous man's obsession. And as souls sprawled beyond the hospital windows, glittering with possibility, Sada knew with absolute certainty that she would choose Minho again, every single time. Because love wasn't always safe or sensible. Sometimes it was dangerous and obsessive and built from mistakes. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Years later, when Grace was old enough to ask how her parents met, Sada would smile and say it was fate. Minho would laugh and tell their daughter the truth, that her mother had accidentally sent him a photo. He'd shown up at her door like a stalker, and they'd both fallen completely in love despite every reason not to. And Grace, with her father's intensity and her mother's artistic soul, would roll her eyes and call them both hopelessly romantic. But she wouldn't be wrong, because the best love stories always started with something impossible, a wrong number, a dangerous man, a brave woman, and the choice to jump off the cliff together, trusting that the fall would somehow turn into flight. And for Sada and Minho, it had. Against all odds, it absolutely had.